Hi, today's topic are relative clauses. And this whole thing with sentences and clauses is quite complex, and you don't really have to worry that much about that unless you're going to study English at a higher level, because then you will need to learn more about sentences and clauses. But just to introduce a little bit into the terminology, I want to say that sentences and clauses are not the same thing. Sentences are, as you can see from the math sign used there, are larger or the same size as clauses. And one of the problems is also the translation, because in Norwegian there is not really a good equivalent. Sentence should normally be translated as helsetning, and those are these things. Tommy needs new shoes. He must go shopping because he has no shoes. And similar sentences. They can contain one or more clauses. And then clause is what in Norwegian is called setning. And here you already see the problem, because setning and sentence sound so similar, but they are not the same thing. Clause is, for example, Tommy needs new shoes. At the same time, this is also a sentence. As you see, sentence is larger or the same size as a clause. And if you take main clause, that would be, for example, Tommy needs new shoes, or that he must go shopping because he has no shoes. And subordinate clause, or bisetning, would be only this part, because he has no shoes. As you can see, subordinate clause cannot stand on its own, while main clause can. So we can say that the sentence is like this big box, and inside of the big box you have main clause, and inside of the main clause you have the subordinate clause. And it can also be more complex. A sentence can have many clauses. All of these examples only have two clauses, the main one and the subordinate one, or two main ones. For example, I told him that Peter fell asleep. Tom is driving so Mary can sleep. The car hit a biker and then just drove off. The last one has two main clauses, and the first two have a main clause and a subordinate clause. But clauses and sentences are just like these Russian dolls. They can fold into each other quite widely. So here is a very long sentence that contains several clauses. I told Peter that yesterday I saw a car which was being stolen, but he was not surprised, since he has lived here for a while. And we can analyze this sentence as we have the big box, and inside there is the first main clause. I told Peter that yesterday I saw a car which was being stolen. Inside of the main clause, we have the first subordinate clause, which is what is green, that yesterday I saw a car which was being stolen. And inside of this subordinate clause, we have one more subordinate clause. That is what is underlined here, which was being stolen. And then we continue and we have one more main clause. He was not surprised, since he has lived here for a while. And inside of this second main clause, we have the second subordinate clause, again in green in the sentence, since he has lived here for a while. So you can see that one sentence can be quite complex. You can fold in many main and subordinate clauses. But you don't have to worry about this that much. Today we are only going to look at one type of subordinate clauses, so-called relative clauses, which in Norwegian are called samsetninger. So if you know what samsetninger are and how they work, you are halfway there. Because English and Norwegian here are actually very similar, and it's very helpful because you can just infer many things. But there are two important differences which we will look at now. The first one is the relative pronoun. You can see that the first sentence, give me the book that is on the table, and give me the book which is on the table. There's a different relative pronoun, but you translate it both with som. Gi meg den boka som på bordet. And if we move even further down, send in the person who is waiting outside, or send in the person that is waiting outside. These again translate just as som. So you can see that the Norwegian som can be translated as that, who, or which. And we need to know which one is which. The second important difference between English and Norwegian concerns a comma. In the first sentence, the book which I gave you is very interesting. There is no comma. There are no commas around the relative clause. While in Norwegian, den boka som jeg ga deg veldig interessant. You have to have a comma after the relative clause, after the som setting. So these are the two main differences, and we'll take them one by one. So which, that, should, who use? Don't worry, that's a nonsense sentence I just made up to put all the relative pronouns into one sentence. And we'll go through them one by one. Who is normally used for people. I asked this guy who lives next door. The people who donate money to charity are not always rich. And here we are in both sentences talking about people, and we use the pronoun who. The pronoun which is used for everything else, normally also animals. So I saw a dog which was chasing a mouse. The house which we bought wasn't very cheap. Everything that is not a person, even living things, but things that are not people, use which. If you want to learn more about one more relative pronoun called whom, I recommend to Google Grammar Girl. Just put Grammar Girl and whom into Google and you will find an interesting explanation. I'm not going to go into it here because it's not that important. The third option I will explain here is that. And that can be used for everything. So in a way, this is the equivalent of some. You can use that in the vast majority of places where you can use some. However, some feel that that is more informal. I'm not sure if I agree, but if your teacher feels this way, you should always follow their instructions. So if your teacher tells you that you should use which and who, you should do that. But you normally can switch these around. You can use that for both which and who. It cannot be used in non-defining relative clauses, and we'll get back to what those are. And you should most of all be consistent. So if in your text you jump from using which and who to using that, it doesn't sound good. But if you use that all through, it's okay. I asked the guy that lives next door. I saw a dog that was chasing a mouse. The last option is zero, or not putting anything there. And this, luckily enough, is the same in Norwegian as in English. The actual rule is that the noun you're referring to must be an object in the sentence, but you don't have to remember that. Just trust your Norwegian sense and it will help you. The car I told you about is for sale. We can also say the car which I told you about, or the car that I told you about. But we can also say nothing. The car I told you about is for sale. And you can also say the same thing in Norwegian. Den bilen jeg snakket om til salg. So when and how should you use relative clauses? They are usually not obligatory, but they make texts more varied and more flowing. So it's a good idea to use them in correct places. For example, this is a very short text which is written completely without relative clauses. I met this boy, he seemed familiar. He said his band sometimes plays in the club. I often visit it. It's fine, it's correct, but it doesn't flow, it doesn't sound good. While if you say something like this, I met this boy who seemed familiar. He said his band sometimes plays in the club, which I often visit. I use two relative clauses to connect the ideas together, and it sounds much better. You can combine many relative and other subordinate clauses in one sentence, but do not overdo it. This is from a nursery rhyme, and the full text, I think, has 9 or 10 lines, and it's very, very complex. This is the dog that worried the cat, that killed the rat, that ate the malt, that lay in the house that Jack built. It's long, it's confusing. By the end, I don't remember what was at the beginning. So don't go overboard, don't use too many, but try to use some relative clauses when you write. They make your text more interesting. And now the second rule we need to remember, the second difference between English and Norwegian, is the comma rule. So in English, relative clauses do not normally have commas around them, unless they add unnecessary information. And this is what I mentioned before, the non-defying relative clauses. In Norwegian, unødvendige somsetninger. So if I only have one sister and I want to say she called me, I can say my sister, comma, who lives in Spain, comma, called me yesterday. However, if the information is necessary to know which one, there are no commas. My sister who lives in Spain calls often, but the one who lives just a couple streets away never talks to me. Here, you would not know which sister unless I mention that unless I said which one, and that's why these relative clauses are necessary and don't have commas around them. In Norwegian, you normally place comma after a relative clause, after a samsetning. So even there where in English you wouldn't, you do in Norwegian. And you place comma both before and after a non-defying or unødvendig relative clause. So in the case where in English the commas are required on both ends is the same in Norwegian, but where Norwegian would put comma after a samsetning, English doesn't when it's necessary information. And now we're going to look at an exercise about the relative pronouns.